Simon and Garfunkel's collaboration is one of the most mysterious and intriguing in music history. Their harmonization on stage was so natural. It was as if they had always been meant to perform together. However, their friendship was far from ordinary behind the scenes. Simon and Art Garfunkel's genuine relationship has been the subject of fan speculation for decades. Two best buddies from childhood who achieved phenomenal success. That is said in writing. Reportedly, that does occur. In all honesty, I'm not sure. Just to crumble all of a sudden. Something more profound, perhaps, than ego, ambition, or treachery. Rumors and partial explanations have obscured the reality for a long time. The real reasons for their breakup are finally coming to light, and the news will stun the whole industry. A career like Paul Simon's, few musicians of the modern era have had careers as full of life, impact, and longevity as Paul Simon. He has been a part of the music industry for almost 60 years, during which time he has written and performed songs that have become cultural icons and pushed the genre's boundaries in new directions. In addition to critically acclaimed albums and top charts, his story is one of personal struggles, innovation, controversy, and perseverance. A full appreciation of his life and work, from his early years as a teenager to his most recent creative pursuits, is essential to grasping his tale, along with the highs and lows that molded him. In the late 1950s, Paul Simon and his childhood buddy Art Garfunkel formed the band Tom and Jerry, which would later become known as Paul Simon and Art Garfunkel. Originally titled Here's to You, Mrs., the song was penned by the duo between 1957 and 1959. Their debut hit, Hey School Girl, sold over 100,000 copies and propelled them to early stardom. This early success demonstrated Simon's talent for connecting with listeners through infectious melodies and young vigor at a period when rock and roll was becoming ingrained in American culture. Despite the brief duration of their partnership, Simon and Garfunkel had already demonstrated their exceptional talent while still teenagers. When they reassembled in 1964, they signed with Columbia Records under their true names. Wednesday Morning, 3 a.m., their first album, had folk-influenced songs that failed to get much attention upon its release. But the folk movement was picking up steam in the 60s, and Simon's songs started to hit home. The cultural power of Simon and Garfunkel, whose lyrical poetry and evocative harmonies would define an entire generation, began with this reunion. While Simon was at his best in the duet setting, he never stopped searching for his unique sound. While he was a resident of England in 1965, he put out his debut solo album, The Paul Simon Songbook. Reflecting Garfunkel's restless creativity and desire to go beyond the duo's established sound, the album featured early versions of songs that would eventually become classics with the singer. In doing so, Simon showed his innate need for autonomy and hinted to the career that would develop following his breakup with Garfunkel. The iconic 1967 picture The Graduate, which included Simon and Garfunkel's music, contributed to the duo's meteoric rise to prominence. The Sound of Silence and Mrs. Robinson were not only huge blockbusters, but they also came to represent a changing America culturally. During this time, Simon cemented his position as a generational leader in analytical songwriting, known for his ability to vividly and subtly convey era moods. Released in 1970, Bridge Over Troubled Water was the apex of Simon and Garfunkel's career. Despite the album's critical and financial success, the duo announced their split not long after the release. Though shocking to the fans, it marked a turning point for Simon. His decision to pursue a career as a solo artist, which would grant him total creative freedom, launched one of the most extraordinary periods in music history. The single Mother and Child Reunion was the lead single from Paul Simon's 1972 self-titled solo album. It was on this album that he shone his ability to thrive independently of Garfunkel, since he was not afraid to try reggae and other various musical influences. It was with this album that Simon solidified his position as a solo musician and songwriter, who dared to do things their own way. The scope of Simon's artistic aspirations extended far beyond the realm of music. He had a starring role in the 1980 picture One Trick Pony and was also responsible for the screenplay and score. Although the initiative failed to garner any commercial success, it showcased Simon's resolve to broaden his creative horizons. Despite mixed reviews, the endeavor demonstrated his willingness to branch out from songwriting. Simon and Garfunkel reunited for a historic concert in Central Park on September 19, 1981, 1 year later. Attracting hundreds of thousands of followers, the concert served as a sign of the enduring impact of their partnership, even after being separated for a long time. The reunion was only temporary, but for many it served as a reminder of the enchantment they had worked so hard to achieve together. The career of Simon underwent yet another daring shift by the mid-1980s. He went to Johannesburg in 1985 to record Graceland, an iconic album. Because it happened during the apartheid-era worldwide cultural boycott of South Africa, this move sparked controversy. Simon denied breaching the boycott and instead claimed that he was trying to highlight the talent of South African musicians by working with them. Among Simon's many critically acclaimed albums, 1980 SIX's Graceland stands out. Its unique sound and musical depth were lauded for fusing Western songwriting with South African elements. The record was praised as a masterwork despite the controversies that surrounded its making. In 1987, after Graceland won Album of the Year at the Grammys, Simon was taken off the UN blacklist, representing an end to the conflicts that had surrounding its creation. With the inclusion of Brazilian and African rhythms in his 1990 album, The Rhythm of the Saints, Simon further expanded his global influences. For their lasting influence as a pair, Simon and Garfunkel were honored that same year with induction into the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame. The capacity to reinvent oneself while staying true to one's beginnings became a defining characteristic of Simon. Simon was honored with the inaugural Gershwin Prize for Popular Song by the Library of Congress in 2007, a recognition that praised his talent for fusing artistic expression with cultural relevance. His career had progressed to the point where his legacy was not only assured, but also cherished with the utmost reverence. Later in life, he did face personal difficulties. After a fight at home in 2014, Simon and Edie Brickell were both detained on disorderly conduct charges. The accusations were eventually dropped, but the episode nonetheless garnered a lot of attention and showed that Simon's personal life was just as turbulent as his business. An era came to a close in 2018 when Simon declared his forthcoming tour would be his final. At Queen's Flushing Meadows Corona Park, he said his goodbyes, completing his journey by returning to its starting point. For listeners, it served as a somber tribute to the music that had shaped their lives for decades. Simon is as creative as ever, even in his twilight years. His 2023 album, 7 Psalms, was an introspective and emotionally charged work that demonstrated his dedication to songwriting as an art form. There has been turbulence in Simon's remarkable career, which has been filled with innovation, reinvention, and lasting cultural impact. In 2024, he spoke candidly about his creative process and struggles with hearing loss in an interview with The Guardian. Moments that garnered harsh criticism, disappointment, or unwelcome news coexist with his numerous achievements. Even the most lauded artists have obstacles that challenge their public image and personal resilience. These issues add another layer to his career. The complexities of sustaining a career at the pinnacle of popularity are laid bare by Simon's journey, which includes political fights that sparked global discussions, artistic endeavors that were unsuccessful, and personal occurrences that made headlines in tabloids. While recording Graceland in 1985 and 1986, Simon was embroiled in a controversy that would go on to define his career. During that period, the world community had instituted a cultural boycott of South Africa, which had the backing of the United Nations, in response to the country's oppressive apartheid system. The boycott aimed to put pressure on South Africa's government to end apartheid by cutting off trade with the country. Regardless, Simon went to Johannesburg to record with South African musicians because he thought their talent was worthy of a worldwide audience. Outrage ensued as soon as he made his decision. Artists and anti-apartheid campaigners alike criticized him for allegedly breaking the boycott and weakening the international movement opposing the repressive government. But Simon defended himself by saying he didn't support apartheid and that he paid the musicians decently while highlighting their great skill. The resultant song was well received by many, while his actions were viewed as a political gaffe by others. There were major consequences. The United Nations cultural blacklist prevented Simon from taking part in some international gatherings. After Graceland's enormous success and the acknowledgement of its cultural exchange in 1987, he was officially removed from the list. The show demonstrated how artistic choices may have far-reaching political ramifications, drawing attention to the overlap between the arts and politics. After more than 10 years, Simon was embroiled in yet another scandal, this time involving the theater. His 1998 undertaking, The Cape Man, was no small feat, a musical for the Broadway stage that Derek Walcott, a Nobel winner, co-wrote. The musical was conceived by Simon with the intention of fusing popular music with theatrical storytelling. It was based on the true story of Salvador Agran, a Puerto Rican gang member convicted of murder in the 1950s. Later known as the Cape Man, Simon invested tremendous energy into the project, penning both the music and the lyrics. But it has terrible consequences. Both critics and spectators were unmoved by the musical's bleak themes and lackluster execution. The production became one of Broadway's most notorious failures despite the star power and Simon's shown songwriting ability. It shuttered after just 68 performances. There were doubts about whether Simon's musical genius could be successfully transferred to the stage after the critical and economic failure of The Cape Man dealt a severe blow to his reputation at the time. His boldness was on display in the initiative, but it also showed that desire isn't a guarantee of success. Simon was in the news for reasons he probably would have liked to stay out of it, even when he wasn't working. He and his wife Edie Brickell were taken into custody in 2014 after a quarrel broke out at their home in Connecticut. The arrest became widely known very soon. The dismay of his admirers, who linked Simon's name more with his tender musical compositions than with any amount of scandal. The accusations were then dismissed, and they were both released soon after. However, the episode captured the interest of the media and the public, who were curious about the couple's private lives. Although this case paled in comparison to his previous scandals, it served as a sobering reminder that fame has a way of magnifying and publicizing even the most private of affairs. It was an incident that, for Simon, cast an unflattering shadow over his lauded later years. A tale of perseverance, creativity, harmony, and reinvention is Art Garfunkel's biography. His path shows a guy who tried to juggle celebrity, self-expression, and adversity, even though his career has been inextricably linked with Paul Simon's from the start. While still preserving an independent corpus of work, one must examine the formative events in Garfunkel's career, beginning with his adolescent years and continuing through his current contemplations on creativity and aging, in order to grasp his position in music history. Along with his many achievements and accolades, his biography details the hardships and losses that shaped the man whose voice is instantly recognizable. Garfunkel initially came to prominence in the years 1957 and 1959 as a member of the teen duo Tom and Jerry, which he co-founded with his boyhood buddy Paul Simon. They collaborated on the energetic track, Hey Schoolgirl, which went on to sell over 100,000 copies. These two young men from Queens achieved phenomenal early success during the societal shift that rock and roll was causing. It was an early indication of their abilities and the beginning of a partnership that would alter the course of popular music forever. Despite the brief nature of Tom and Jerry, it signaled the start of a collaboration that would shape Garfunkel's career in large part. When Simon and Garfunkel were at the height of their partnership from 1962 to 1970, they became one of the most renowned duos in music history. Their collaborative work produced several seminal albums, such as Wednesday Morning, 3 a.m., Sounds of Silence, Parsley, Sage, Rosemary and Thyme, Bookends, and the groundbreaking Bridge Over Troubled Water. A sound that was both very modern and evocative of its time was born from the marriage of Simon's genius as a songwriter with Garfunkel's heavenly voice. Scarborough Fair, Mrs. Robinson, and Bridge Over Troubled Water were songs that catapulted them into cultural icons, surpassing their ordinary chart triumph. However, despite the meteoric rise of their music, they were unable to overcome the underlying artistic and emotional conflicts that led to their 1970 split. The task of establishing himself as a solo artist followed Garfunkel's long history of fame as half of a pair. The release of Angel Clare in 1973 marked Garfunkel's formal debut as a solo artist. One of his most iconic solo works, the ballad All I Know featured on the album, highlighted his unfiltered singing approach. The album's success validated Garfunkel's ability to perform solo and shown that his voice was vital to their previous collaboration as well as capable of supporting his own creative identity. His attempts to establish a career outside from Simon and Garfunkel's influence began with this. Albums like Watermark and Breakaway, released by Garfunkel in the mid to late 1970s, continued to strengthen his solo reputation. Bright Eyes, which became a huge hit in the UK, and What a Wonderful World were among the songs used in these works. During this time, he was most known for his folk-influenced ballads and gentle rock, which he frequently performed with an emphasis on delicate feeling and elaborate arrangements. During this time, Garfunkel showed that he could sensitively interpret songs, a skill that allowed him to maintain his voice's distinctiveness despite the surrounding musical trends. Tragically, his partner Laurie Bird, an actor and photographer, died by suicide in 1979. After Garfunkel's loss, he fell into a severe despair that impacted him for a long time. Later interviews revealed that he struggled to keep up with his job while dealing with grief over the event's devastating impact on him. Living in the public limelight while privately coping with loss and sadness is difficult, as this personal agony highlighted. Garfunkel continued performing despite his loss. He was a part of one of the most iconic reunions in music history and released the album Scissors Cut in 1981. Over 500,000 people flocked to see Simon and Garfunkel play a free concert in New York Central Park on September 19th of that year. Their relationship has always been powerful, and this occasion served as a reminder of the special alchemy that can be achieved when two voices harmonize. Even though their relationship was strained, the concert was a professional victory for Garfunkel and a bittersweet reminder of how profoundly listeners responded with their songs. Simon and Garfunkel were inducted into the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame in 1990, with Garfunkel joining Simon. At a later point in his career, he would also receive individual recognition, which would confirm his distinct artistic achievements. This recognition was a watershed moment in the duo's career, solidifying their position in music history and confirming Garfunkel's status as a generational icon. Recognizance and reunion entered a new chapter in the early 2000s. Garfunkel and Simon temporarily regrouped in 2003 and 2004 for a round of concerts. The duo's enormous impact on contemporary music was recognized when they were presented with the Grammy Lifetime Achievement Award at this time. The reunion brought to light the cultural importance of their cooperation and the eternal quality of the music they had made together, despite the fact that their relationship remained complex. What Is It All But Luminous? Garfunkel's memoir was published in 2015. Memories of a man who lived underground. His inner life, including his ideas, feelings, and reflections, were laid bare for readers in the book, demonstrating his penchant for poetry through written word. In his memoir, Garfunkel opened up about his life and career with candor and reflection, providing readers a window into his inner world and expanding the scope of his creative work. Garfunkel maintained an active and creative lifestyle even into his twilight years. They recorded an album together called Garfunkel and Garfunkel, Father and Son, which came out in 2024. Endeavor that integrated musical elements with ties to one's family. This release highlighted the continuous personal significance of music in Garfunkel's life and served as a symbol of the transmission of tradition and creativity from one generation to another. Additionally, it gave his admirers a glimpse of him in a different light, not merely as a musician, but as a father passing his talent on to the youth of today. Garfunkel continued to contemplate his voyage even in the year 2025. He made it clear in an interview with The Guardian that he never announced his retirement, while also being candid about his creative process and his struggles with hearing loss. Even though he was becoming older, his comments demonstrated that his love of music and creativity never faded. It served as a gentle reminder that Garfunkel was, deep down, just an artist who loved making music and connecting with people. Art's issues and life challenges. The life and career of Art Garfunkel are molded by profound emotions, personal hardships, and magnificent music. When he was a youngster in the late 1950s, he and Paul Simon formed the band Tom and Jerry. This was the beginning of his career. Hey Schoolgirl, their collaborative single, sold more than 100,000 copies, much to everyone's surprise. They got a taste of fame early on thanks to their achievements. They laid the groundwork for a legendary musical collaboration. Audiences started to take note of the special connection Garfunkel had with Simon at this early stage, and his pure, angelic voice was already a draw. From humble beginnings as two carefree Queens youngsters jamming together, one of the most legendary musical partnerships in American history was born. Reuniting under their true identities, Garfunkel and Simon joined with Columbia Records in the early 1960s. Simon and Garfunkel recorded a series of seminal albums that would go down in history as touchstones of popular music from 1962 to 1970. Wednesday Morning, 3 a.m. was only their humble debut. Nevertheless, with albums like Sounds of Silence, Parsley, Sage, Rosemary, Time and Eternity, and Parsley, Sage, Rosemary, they became the cultural voices of their time. Their 1970 landmark album, Bridge Over Troubled Water, was the pinnacle of their partnership and solidified their position in music history. Among the most iconic performances of the 20th century was Garfunkel's soaring vocals on the title track. Tensions within the partnership started to rise, though, as their success reached new levels, and the two artists formally parted ways soon after Bridge Over Troubled Water was released. Garfunkel continued her career as a solo artist following the split. All I Know was the lead single from his 1973 debut album, Angel Clare. The album highlighted his distinctive singing style and profound emotional range, demonstrating his capacity to perform independently. He continued to put out albums in the 1970s with titles like Watermark and Breakaway, featuring hits like Bright Eyes and What a Wonderful World. Through these endeavors, he was able to distinguish himself from Simon and showcase his talent for interpreting songs in a manner that deeply resonated with audiences. The decade came to a close with Garfunkel becoming acknowledged as a renowned solo performer in addition to his side of the famed pair. Tragically, though, Garfunkel's life would be forever altered in 1979. Lori Bird's suicide was a devastating blow to him. She was his partner and a photographer as well. Garfunkel retreated from public life and battled a profound sadness that would follow him for years as he struggled with bereavement. His 1981 album Scissors Cut is a prime example of how this personal tragedy impacted his music, which was obviously emotionally weighty. The world finally saw that Garfunkel's angelic voice was not immune to suffering with Bird's passing. In spite of his charisma and flawless performances, he was a vulnerable guy dealing with an intolerable loss. His songs from that time on reflected that. Despite going through some tough times personally, Garfunkel rejoined Simon for the 1981 Central Park concert, which would go down in history. With almost 500,000 people in attendance, the event served as a poignant reminder of the extraordinary things they were capable of doing when united. Still, Garfunkel maintained a healthy mix of solo work and occasional collaborations, even after all this fame. In the 80s and 90s, he dabbled in acting in films like Catch, 22, and Carnal Knowledge, and he made albums like Lefty and Up Till Now. He also diversified his profession by lending his voice to animation projects. Over the course of those decades, Garfunkel established himself as much more than a duet singer. As an artist, he could switch gears and express himself in a variety of ways. The legendary duo of Simon and Garfunkel were feted for their immense musical impact in 1990 when they were inducted into the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame. The induction brought attention to the cultural legacy they created together, even though their personal relationship was still problematic. Their brief reunion in the early 2000s was marked with a Grammy Lifetime Achievement Award and a successful tour that brought back memories of their music's enduring appeal. Despite all the praise, their relationship was still weak, and they would spend a lot of time apart. Both creation and contemplation persisted in Garfunkel's life as he progressed. He wrote and released a book in 2015 called What Is It All But Luminous? Letters written by an underground man that reveal his life's journey, artistic endeavors, and philosophical musings. Next, in 2024, he and his son James shocked fans by releasing Garfunkel and Garfunkel, Father and Son. The CD demonstrated that Garfunkel's dedication to music making persisted even in his last years, and it also served as a memorial to his musical legacy. He stressed that he never planned to retire by openly reflecting on his creative process and obstacles, including hearing loss, even in 2025. Paul discusses his estrangement from the art world for the first time. In addition to the music they created together, the emotional ups and downs of Paul Simon and Art Garfunkel's friendship have always captivated listeners. Theirs is a tale of unparalleled creative genius intertwined with decades of animosity, bruised feelings, and lingering disputes. Restless Dreams, Paul Simon's Music, is a documentary in which Simon discusses this dynamic at length, reflecting on how a boyhood friendship became one of the most complex relationships in the history of modern music. By thinking back on these experiences, we can better grasp the true nature of the break, the unease that accompanied reunions, and the lingering effects of their shared past. From the very beginning, Simon and Garfunkel's collaboration was fraught with tension, defined by conflicts regarding the authority to make decisions and individual aspirations. The first fissure emerged when Paul Simon secretly signed a record deal without informing Garfunkel. Garfunkel felt left out of the conversation because of this decision, which they should have addressed together. The tables turned later on. Paul also felt deceived when Art Garfunkel went for acting parts in films like Carnal Knowledge and Catch, 22, without talking to Simon. Simon took this as a sign that Garfunkel was putting personal pursuits ahead of the band's music, abandoning him to shoulder the creative load alone. Their final breakup was laid bare by these instances of misunderstanding and disappointment. Paul Simon has stated that an imbalance is at the root of the problem. Simon authored the words, composed the melodies, and oversaw the recording sessions, but Garfunkel's voice added a special touch to their tunes. According to him, our relationship was unbalanced because I was the one who wrote all the songs and also ran the sessions, telling the bass player what to do and how to play the guitar part. On the other hand, Garfunkel and producer Roy Haley would frequently provide approbation rather than equal creative contribution. Simon freely acknowledges that the unequal division of responsibilities caused some underlying tension, which eventually turned into resentment. The making of Bridge Over Troubled Water, their fifth and last studio album, was the turning point. Garfunkel took a role in the film Catch, 22, while Simon was in the midst of writing songs for the album. Simon vividly remembers that occasion. After 6 months of filming, Garfunkel planned to come back to recording new music, according to his suggestion. That was intolerable to Simon. Yes, that will definitely not occur. He distinctly recalled telling himself, "I'm not going to do that." From the beginning, he saw their relationship as a cooperative one, where thoughts were shared instantly. Simon clarified that it wasn't as if he returned and inquired, "What is the compilation of your new songs composed during the past 6 months?" I used to ask people for their opinions all the time while I was composing music. Everything that truly piqued our curiosity, we exchanged. The estrangement that had once been defined by Garfunkel's absence at such a pivotal creative time felt like a betrayal. Before Bridge Over Troubled Water, Simon and Garfunkel were best friends and business partners, as Simon himself stated. According to Simon in the documentary, "We were truly great friends until Bridge Over Troubled Water." The peace of the friendship, however, was disrupted thereafter. It was damaged. The album that catapulted them to fame was also the one that shattered their collaboration. Their pinnacle of creative accomplishment is this paradox that has persisted as a distinguishing element of their narrative, occurring simultaneously with the breakdown of their partnership. The emotional intricacy persisted even after the 1970 breakup. Yes, it frequently took place in front of an audience. Occasionally directly, Garfunkel vented his annoyance throughout the years. For abandoning their triumph, he accused Simon of being a complete moron and a jerk, comments that showed how fresh the wounds were. At the same time, Simon struggled with the dual emotions of being Garfunkel's golden voice's linchpin and the main creative force behind the band. One of his first memories is seeing Simon and Garfunkel's live performance of his song Bridge Over Troubled Water and the enthusiastic applause from the crowd. "I wrote that song," was his first thinking. Such incidents, for Simon, confirmed the disproportion he had always sensed. One guy was the center of attention, while the other wrote the songs in the background. Both the professional and emotional aspects of their lives were affected by these tensions. Simon has detailed how the dynamic was impacted by outside forces beginning in childhood. He remembers his mom telling him once that he had a beautiful voice. His perception of their positions in the partnership was shaped by this, which he described as a form of Freudian trauma. After years of unfair comparisons between them as children, inequities in their careers, and Garfunkel's absence at crucial junctures, Simon finally snapped. He mentioned "My oldest friend and our time spent anonymously in restless dreams." The subsequent acclaim and prosperity, and there's pressure associated with those things. They were unable to continue their connection under the pressures of celebrity and uneven contributions.